Madam Speaker, welcome to Bloomberg.
Wonderful to be here.
Great to have you here. Let's start with the economy. We have jobs numbers now for the month of October, which were surprisingly good, given the GM strike. We have an economy that's growing. We have real wages growing. How does the economy look to the average worker across America?
While you make some indications that the economy may be improving, and God willing it is, in the lives of American workers, they still feel a stagnation of their wages, a stagnation of their opportunity. And so I think I know that we've been having some constructive conversations about how we have an economy that works for everyone. An economy recognizes we're a free market economy, and that though we want everyone to participate more fully in our success. And that means I always say to people, Adam Smith wrote 2 books, Wealth of Nations, and then another book about our responsibilities to each other. It wasn't really a compassionate book, but it was a pragmatic book about you have to lift everybody up. And I wish he had written 1 book to combine those 2 things. So again, I think when President Bush ran, he said compassionate conservatism. It was a good, it resonated well with the American people. I think our capitalism has to be more inclusive in terms of its success. So our policies, whether it's taxation or whether it's appropriations in terms of budget or just policy in terms of how we value, for example, the climate crisis and what a job opportunity that is, and for many new people who haven't been in the higher ranks of our economy to have opportunity. We just have to be thinking more than just trickle down, but bubble up.
As we look forward to 2020, where we have not just the presidential election, but obviously an entire House of Representatives, a third of the Senate, what is the Democratic equivalent to compassionate conservatism? What's the capitalistic with some compassion? What is the alternative?
Well, I think it's something that we have to do working together because we're talking about every aspect of the federal government in terms of taxation, budget spending, investments, et cetera. But where our agenda was in the last election, which we continue with, is for the people to lower health care costs by lowering the cost of prescription drugs and guaranteeing the benefit of a pre-existing condition, not barring you from health care. Because that addresses not only the health of the American people, but the financial health. They're very concerned about health needs, just making it impossible for them to succeed. And again, prescription drugs being a big part of that.
And you have a bill on prescription drugs that I want to talk about, but first on healthcare more broadly. You had a very successful, the Speaker of the House, but also the Democrats had a very successful experience in the House of Representatives in the last election. You gained a majority back. In part, I believe that was because people were worried about what President Trump and his administration would do to health care. Given the debates that we've had so far, it seems like the concern has shifted to now the Medicare for All maybe taking away our insurance that a lot of people have fought long and hard for and don't want to give up. How do you avoid actually frightening the American people on health care rather than reassuring them?
Well, first let me say that one of the reasons we had a success last year was the concern about health care, but it made our own environment, and not just us. Patient advocacy groups, little lobbyists, children, 10,000 events were held throughout the country about the cost of health care, cost to individuals, to families, et cetera. And that just made, what do you intend to do about that? And we said we were going to lower the cost of prescription drugs, and we're on a path to do it, and hopefully in a bipartisan way, because that will be sooner. I'm not a big fan of Medicare for all. I mean, I welcome the debate. I think that we should have health care for all. I think that the Affordable Care Benefit is better than the Medicare benefit, but we have invited advocates for it to testify in Congress, in the Ways and Means Committee, in the Budget Committee, in the Rules Committee, being respectful of the point of view. But it is expensive. Who pays is very important. What are the benefits that come in there? So I would think that hopefully, as we emerge into the election year, the mantra will be more health care for all Americans, because there is a comfort level that some people have with their current private insurance that they have. And if that is to be phased out, let's talk about it, but let's not just have one bill that would do that. Myself, I think, remember November. This is a time when we have to win the Electoral College. Otherwise, we'll be faced with the president again who doesn't really care about increasing health benefits.
Can you win the Electoral College with Medicare for All? Are you worried about that? I understand that your policy position is you don't think that's necessarily the best way to go, but what as a political matter?
Well, it would increase the vote in my own district, but that's not what we need to do in order to win the Electoral College. I think that as we come out of the primary season and people see what the challenges are that are out there, because when people are on the campaign trail, they're listening. They're listening to people. That's the beauty of campaigns. You listen, and when they hear what people say, I think something will emerge that connects more directly with the aspirations and concerns that people have.
You mentioned the prescription drug issue, and you are working on that right now actively in the House of Representatives. What are the prospects of getting that done before the election next year?
Well, the president has said this is something that he wants to do, and we want to work together to do that. And some of the principles that we have in our legislation are initiatives that I think might be acceptable to him, and we'll find out as we go along how committed he is to it. But it enables the secretary to negotiate for prescription drugs. It makes it much less expensive for us, for consumers to pay. Maybe they're paying 5 times what's happening in other countries, and now it will be down to only 120%. Benefits could be increased for Medicare as we shape the bill as we go forward. But it is, it's transformative because it will directly improve the lives of Americans. I've seen grown men cry on the campaign trail. They're saying, I want to take care of my family and this or that. My wife is sick. We can't afford the drugs. We have to cut drugs in half. And when people don't take their medication because they can't afford it, that's just not right.
It's clear that a lot of Americans are very concerned about prescription drug prices, and as you say, there's a bipartisan move in that direction. If you get that done, though, prescription drugs, if you take them as a whole, are a relatively modest portion of overall health care costs. Are you concerned with bending the cost curve overall? We're at 18% of GDP right now. It's very, very expensive. Has the Affordable Care Act really done what you hoped it would do in controlling costs?
Yes, it did, and I want to disagree with you on one point. The reason that the increase has not leveled off to the extent that we want is because of the cost of prescription drugs. Other elements of the Affordable Care Act have brought down the rate of increase of health care in our country, except for the cost of prescription drugs.
When we talk about even distribution of jobs, of wealth in the country, we're mindful of some of the proposals that we're hearing right now in the campaign. Things like a wealth tax, a substantial wealth tax. Very controversial, particularly with a lot of people who watch Bloomberg. Very controversial. People are questioning the merits of the wisdom of it. Where are you on a wealth tax?
When as I say all the time, whatever we do about our revenue, our taxation, has to be done in a bipartisan way. We have to have fairness, and we also have to have enough to run the government, but we don't want any more government than we need. And as these candidates are putting forth their ideas on these things, it's up to them to describe why that is a good thing and how that will help grow the economy. But I do think that I would enlarge the issue to talk about how do we conduct our meeting the needs of the American people in a way that does not increase the deficit, that does increase job creation and have growth that creates job creation for good paying jobs. And we think that growing the infrastructure of America is a path to get that done, to do it. And I would like it in a green way. We'll see what the president would be willing to do, but there's plenty of area of common ground for us to do that, because what we want to do is increase the paychecks. And again, however it is paid for, that's a negotiation.
You talk about growth, which is terribly important, because if there's more for everyone, everyone will do better, we hope. President Trump ran basically on a pro-growth policy, and he did deliver tax cuts, what everyone thinks about them.
A tax scam that benefited 83% of the benefits benefit the top 1% in our country.
But it increased the GDP growth for a period of time at least. We're at 2%, and unemployment's at a 50-year low. If you were a Trump voter in one of those key districts in 2016, what in 2020 is going to cause you to say, you know what, I'm going to switch to a democratic approach to growth in this country?
Well, let me just say this about your characterization. To the average working person, what we consider, what I proposed as indicators, where the stock market is, where the GDP is, that isn't necessarily resonating with them. They want to know why their wages are stagnating. The unemployment rate, that's interesting, and that's important. But what we're talking about is growing the paycheck, reducing the cost of health care, growing the paycheck, because our economy will grow better if people have consumer confidence and they spend and they inject demand into the economy, which further creates jobs, not about some indicators that may or may not relate to their lives. So let's take apart what it means that when you say the GDP is higher, and why and in what respect. I think the president's tax bill, in the dark of night and the speed of light, with many mistakes, benefiting the top 1%, 83% of the benefits, now 1%, was a scam. And now they're coming to us to say, you have to help us correct all the mistakes that we made in it. So we will try to work together to help with some of the technical corrections, seeing what we can get for America's working families as we do that. But it is, it's just not, you shouldn't do a tax bill of that magnitude without it being bipartisan.
Let's talk about what the alternative is, a democratic alternative that will have growth for everyone, where the workers will participate as well. We hear a lot of proposals, and it's not just a wealth tax, other proposals as well, taxation and things, that seem to have some Democrats running against big business, against big tech. They want to break it up, against big wealth. Is that a winning strategy for the Democrats in 2020?
Well, they're different categories. I mean, again, when we want to grow our economy, when I send my members to a discussion, as we have in the past, about the budget, how we reduce the budget, the deficit, the national debt, I always say to them the following: just put in the middle of the table growth, growth. And what proposals do people have to grow the economy, to create good paying jobs, and not adding to the national debt? Because it's poisonous into all the debt service that we have to pay for tax cuts for the rich. So so that is, I said, be agnostic. Wherever the solution comes from, the right, the left, wherever it comes, be agnostic. It doesn't matter the provenance. What matters is the result for the American people. So one of our main initiatives on the growth area is to, in a significant way, address the infrastructure needs in our country. There are trillions of dollars of deficit, and that's where we need to invest in that in a way that creates good paying jobs for the American people, and those jobs are here. I do think that certain things are inevitable, globalization, innovation, and the rest, and we should be thinking of what does that mean in the lives of the average American worker, and not make decisions that are separate from bubble up, not trickle down.
We're going to take a brief break.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Water.
Yeah, all of a sudden I was losing it.
We're worried about you.
I should have had the water.
You've been talking for hours here.
Yeah.
It's hardly surprising.
I'm sorry, I was turning into a horse.
Sorry. No, well, that's why we don't want that. We don't want that.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry.
So it is.
So can I pick it up with infrastructure? Is that all right?
Yeah.
You talk about infrastructure and how important that is for growth. And I think everyone agrees with that. But if this were a business, you say we have to invest some money, spend some money. If you're not going to increase the federal deficit, you have to save it somewhere. Where do you save it? Because not many of the candidates on either side of the aisle for president talk much about saving money.
Well, let me just say this about infrastructure, because we're talking about infrastructure, but in order to grow the infrastructure in a way that really benefits the American people, we have to have not only physical infrastructure, but human infrastructure. We have to have a workforce, a trained workforce to do the jobs. And so education is the biggest investment that we can make. It helps the economy in every way, not only people and their individual aspirations, but it's about making America more competitive in the world, but having a trained workforce. And to grow the economy, we need a trained workforce. And so as we go forward, we look at what we need. It's about job creation, just to build it, but it's also about creating opportunities for commerce to have products going to market more quickly, about infrastructure that relates to broadband, universal broadband into rural America especially, so that all that it's about education, it's about business, the economy of those regions, it's about healthcare in those regions. So again, this is something that America needs, and it's a safety issue, by the way. Bridges are crumbling, roads are in disrepair, so it's about quality of life, keeping people out of their cars, because it's going to be shorter time to go someplace, shorter time for product to market, shorter time for people to have access to information because of broadband. And again, it's exciting. It's exciting. It's about building America. It's what America started with. Thomas Jefferson, his first infrastructure bill was called the Gallatin Project, and it was the Secretary of Treasury who was tasked to build the infrastructure of America, Cumberland Road, Erie Canal, into the Louisiana Purchase, into the Lewis and Clark expeditions, but just into America. 100 years later, Teddy Roosevelt, in honoring of that 100-year anniversary, established his infrastructure, which was the National Park Service, a green infrastructure of America. 100 years later, plus now, we really need to have something that thinks big about investing in America. And by the way, nothing brings more money to the Treasury than investing in education. Early childhood, K through 12, higher ed, post-grad, nothing brings more money to the Treasury. You can ask most economists that question. So when we talk about budget, this is an investment. It's an investment. People say, oh, you're spending on education. No, we're investing in education.
We now have a formal resolution in the House of Representatives to proceed with an impeachment inquiry, and the Judiciary Committee will actually hold open hearings on this. Were you surprised and or disappointed that you got no Republicans to go with you?
No, first of all, it'll be the Intelligence Committee that will be having the hearings. This is an issue in the Intelligence Committee. So when we have open hearings, they will be under the auspices of the Intelligence Committee. After that, depending on if a decision is made to impeach, and that decision has not been made, then it would go to the Judiciary Committee to take it from there. I'm never surprised. No, I mean, it's just really, we have decided that we're going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's the oath of office we take. For a long time, I've resisted weighing the equities of whether this was divisive for the country, but what the president did vis-a-vis the president of Ukraine just removed all doubt that we had to act upon that. And this is not about his personality, his policies. That's for the election. This is about the Constitution. This is about defending our democracy, which the president has said. Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. It doesn't. Article 2 makes him a monarch if he interprets it that way. That's not what our founders had in mind. A republic, Benjamin Franklin said, if we can keep it. We think it's our time to keep it. You mentioned time in the beginning. We think the times have found us. Thomas Paine said at the time of the Revolution, the times have found us to declare independence, do all that our founders did. They wrote a constitution. Thank God they made it amendable so that we could expand freedom over time and continue to do so. But what the president has done is to say the three separate and co-equal branches of government, forget that. Article 2, it's about me. I can do that.
If the thing that changed is the president's dealings with the president of Ukraine that we discovered in part from that modified transcript that we got, if that's it, can you limit the inquiry going forward to that subject, or will it inevitably broaden into all sorts of other questions?
Well, that'll be up to the committees of jurisdiction. However, this was not to trivialize what the president did, because in that call, he undermined our national security by overturning, just interpreting what Congress intended in a bipartisan way to send military aid to Ukraine. And who doesn't like that? Putin. What he did in Syria, who likes that? Putin, giving him a stronger toehold in the Middle East. What he has said about the NATO and our commitment to NATO, who benefits from that? Putin. So that they're not all related to the Constitution, but the phone call did. So again, I have kind of tried to weigh the equities in all of this, not trying to avoid dividing our country further than he already has divided it, but also to, we have no choice. We took an oath to protect and defend our democracy. And that is what he has made an assault on. And if the Republicans have a higher loyalty to the president than they do to their oath of office, that's their problem. But the American people, I think, don't want that. Just imagine, suppose a Democratic president emerged. Do you think those same people would want that president to say, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want? I don't think they want that. That's not a rule of law. Is a democracy. Rule of a person is a monarchy. We rejected that at the beginning of our country.
You served with Mike Pence when he was in the Congress before he was vice president. What would he be like as a president?
I have no idea, but this is, we haven't even made a decision to impeach. This is what an inquiry is about.
But you started a process, the logical extreme of which would be removal of the president.
Well, I don't think it's so extreme if he has violated the Constitution. But then, nonetheless, our responsibility in the House is to make a judgment about impeachment, and then that would go to the Senate, and they'd have to decide whether they're honoring their oath of office to defend our democracy. Because this is what changed everything for me. Because I don't like people wanted me to impeach President Bush for the war in Iraq. What could be worse than that? But that's about the election. It's not about the impeachment. I thought it was wrong that they impeached President Clinton. I don't like impeachment. It divides. And our founders gave us guidance. E pluribus from any one. Whatever you do, remember that we are one. And I think that is important. But what we're talking about now is taking us into a whole other class of objection to what the president has done. And there may be other, there were 11 obstruction of justice provisions in the Mueller report. Perhaps some of them will be part of this, but again, that will be part of the inquiry to see where we go.
A whole other class of inquiry. Can you do business with the President of the United States that you're investigating for possible impeachment? Can you get other of the nation's business done at the same time?
Of course. We are working now on a Mexico-U.S.-Canada trade agreement, and I'm optimistic that we can be successful with that.
What's keeping us from getting that done?
Well, we don't have the assurances that we need on enforcement. I myself voted for NAFTA. I had some disappointments, but one of the big disappointments is if you don't have enforcement, you are just having a conversation. Nice things that are listed, but you don't have enforcement. And I think that we can come to a place on this that not only is a good trade agreement of itself, but it will be a template for good trade agreements as we go forward. So it's not just NAFTA, old NAFTA with sugar on top, to say, oh, it's better. No, it has to be really better for America's workers. Again, I don't like trickle-down economics, and I don't like trickle-down trade. It's got to start with the workers.
If you got to that point, would you be willing to go forward with USMCA with a minority of your caucus, a majority of the House?
I won't have that. We are.
You have to have a majority of the Democratic caucus.
No, it's not about that. It's about having agreement on the trade agreement. It all springs from what is in the trade agreement. I have gone in the past to the floor with a minority of my members, but that's not what this is. This is about a policy that we are establishing that isn't, again, just to pass it, we'll pass something less than has true enforcement in it, because if you don't have enforcement, Like, I had the Chinese leadership in my office, and I complained to them about their dumping of rubber into our, and they said, well, when we joined the WTO, they told us we didn't have to obey those regulations. So if you don't have enforcement, real enforcement, and a commitment to honoring the agreement, we're just, again, doing a bad deal for America's workers. And by the way, workers in Mexico and Canada as well.
I think everyone agrees that you are a very effective legislator. You know how to count votes, you know how to do negotiations, you know how to come to terms. You've dealt with the President of the United States a fair amount now. How do you get to yes with Donald Trump? What makes him tick? How do you work with him to get to a place where you have enough commonality, you can get something done?
Well, we always want the President of the United States to succeed. That's just the way it is. The election happens, you want the President to succeed. But if he doesn't really believe in governance, it's hard to get to a place where we have a results-oriented proposal to go forward. But he has said that he does want to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. And he puts out stuff that isn't, you know, we'll find a common ground. I think we can. He has said that he wants to build the infrastructure of America. Almost every conversation I've ever had with him up until recently has been about included infrastructure. So I think in those two, our three things were lower cost of prescription drugs, bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure, and cleaner government. I don't think he's interested in that.
Well, you said until recently there was that infamous now meltdown, people call it, meeting at the White House. Have you talked to the President since then?
No.
Do you intend to? I mean, how can you reestablish relationships with this man after some of the things that have happened in the White House?
Well, we are working with the administration and the trade representative on the Mexico Free Trade Agreement, working with his people on what we can do about the prescription drug bill, and we work with him and the Republicans on doing our appropriations bills, which is what we have to do right now, is pass the appropriation bill, and we have some obstacles to getting that done. But in those rooms are the House, Senate, and the White House as part of those negotiations. We don't have to be the ones talking all the time. There's a lot of work that the staff can do, and I'm an appropriator. That's the culture I was forged in Congress, two places, intelligence and appropriations. And I know, left to their own devices, the appropriators, Democrats and Republicans working together, can bring us to a place that can keep government open. On intelligence, however, though, when the President called and told me how perfect his conversation was, I said, Mr. President, you're into my wheelhouse now. This is not perfect. This is perfectly wrong. And that was that conversation. But that preceded the meeting at the White House.
You are the first woman in history to be Speaker of the House. When will we have a second? What's coming down the pipeline?
Well, I think that there's plenty of opportunity for not only a woman, but diversity in all aspects of our government. But I am excited to be the Speaker of the House in the Congress that will observe the 100th anniversary of women having the right to vote. And in the House, we have, for the first time, over 100 women members of the House. I'm proud to say 91 of them are Democrats, because we made a decision to increase the number every election. When I first went, there were 11 Republicans and 12 Democrats. We went from 12 to 91. They went from 11 to 15, because they just have to make that decision, and hopefully they will, as we want more women on all sides of the aisle.
And you've been undeniably successful at that. At the same time, some of the challenges that I think we see in the House, we see in corporate America as well, where we bring women in at entry levels, but it's harder to get them up to the so-called C-suite. What experience do you have that might actually help corporate America? What do you need to do? Sometimes you have to go out of the system. You have to even break the system to make sure that they can get through that glass ceiling.
Well, I love to hear you saying that, because it is really important, because nothing is more wholesome, speaking from a political and government standpoint, than the increased participation of women and in the leadership of these organizations. And as far as corporate America, our military, the academic world, politics and government, nothing is more wholesome for the system than the increased leadership of women. And we truly believe that when women succeed, America succeeds. And so we want women to have the confidence that there's no secret sauce. They can do the job. So not be shy about that. And again, it will be thrilling to see many more women in the higher ranks of corporate America, on boards and all the rest, because it's not that women are better than men, it's the diversity of opinion The beauty is in the mix of it all. And it will happen. I said the other day, pretty soon there's going to be a day that comes when people will say, how can we let more men to Congress?
That would be the day. How do you have that increased diversity of opinion, which is important in the corporate boardroom as well as, without having increased division? Because you mentioned before the partisanship in the country.
Yeah.
Can we get on a path, do you see us on a path in the foreseeable future to less partisanship?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with people being exuberant about their point of view. But I do think we all have an obligation to find our common ground. And again, as I always say, confident in our own point of view, humble enough to listen to other people. And the division that we have now is, as I say, when I was Speaker with President Bush, we worked together on any number of issues and had a lot of success in that arena. What's happening now is beyond policy. It's almost cultural or something that the president is engaged in. And I think we have some healing to do in our country. And again, e pluribus unum, when you're making decisions about the debate and the back and forth, to always strive for unity. I always say to my members, our diversity is our strength, because we have a diversity in every way. Opinion, gender ID, generation, geography, ethnicity. Our diversity is our strength. Our unity is our power. And that's what we have to be thinking of. So when I became Speaker this time, and before too, but just most recently, I said we're going to have a Congress that is transparent in what we do, bipartisan wherever possible, and honoring e pluribus unum at all times.
Madam Speaker, thank you so much for being
For the many
really
one.
appreciate it. Exactly. Thank you so much, Madam
Thank
Speaker.
you very much.
Great
My
to have you.
pleasure. Lovely to see you. Thank you.